Now I'm going live. Uh-oh. Well, would you be ready to start in just a second?
Would I want to start in just a second?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
why not?
okay? All right, great, because I just pressed the live stream button.
What's the protocol? Do you introduce me or something?
Yeah, I'll give you just a very short introduction. Yeah, here we are. And now we're live. And we're even being recorded. All right, well, here we are. We're still alive. We're live in the virtual sense, in the real sense. Intellectually, I hope we're still alive and ready to take in some more interesting information. And because there's going to be a lot of it here, I think. We are thrilled to have Mr. Michael Steinlauf with us, all the way from, well, usually from Pennsylvania, but I think
No, I'm in Philadelphia right now.
you're in Philadelphia right now. Great, yeah.
I'm in
Great
Mount
to see.
Airy in Philadelphia.
Ah, yes, the other Mount Airy. Yeah, and yeah, we've been sort of started, I think, at the end with this project that's happening now with this Kisselhoff stuff, and then we went back in time and we got a bit of an overview of what's in the Vernadsky Library. Then we went further back and got 1,000 years of Polish history in an hour. Then we kind of went forward to the 20th century to why the ethnomusicologists were working in the first place and what were some of their kind of cultural ideas. And now I think we're going to kind of dip a little bit further back to go forward to think outside of just the music realm, what was happening with this whole Yiddish culture, Yiddish secular culture, something that was kind of mentioned yesterday. And why Yiddish or why Hebrew or why anything. But without further ado, I think I'll just hand it over to you, Michael, and let you tell the people, and maybe, yeah, maybe we'll get into it, and afterwards I'll ask you a little bit more about your work and how you came to it.
Please do. And let me just get my thing here. So I won't be able to see you, but you can see me, correct?
Right.
All right. Hold on a second. Let me just fix this up a little bit. There I am. Okay. Let me just okay. Am I ready? Are we ready to start? Hello? Hello?
Yes, I think let's do it.
Okay, good.
Great.
So first of all, happy Shabbos. Agit Shabbos Alaman. And I'm kind of amazed to be in Weimar, albeit virtually, Weimar with its associations. I mean, Weimar from Goethe to Klezmer, right? And so it's amazing to be here. I mean, historical, length of time and the significance of this place. So anyway, let's start. So I'd like to begin by comparing two epitaphs, Sholem Aleichem's and Y.L. Peretz's. Sholem Aleichem wrote his own. It's inscribed on his tombstone, which is located in the Workman's Circle section of Mount Carmel Cemetery in Queens, in New York. Do liegt ein Jid, a Posheter, geschrieben Yiddish Teich for Bible, und fallen Prosten Volk Hotel, gewinn a Humorist, a Schreiber. Here lies a simple Jew, wrote in Yiddish for women, and for simple folk, he was a humorist, a writer. Das ganze Leben ausgelacht, geschlagen mit der Welt Kapores. Die ganze Welt hat gut gemacht, und oi weh, gewinn auf Zores. He laughed at all of life, told the world where to get off, made the whole world feel good, but he, oh dear, had troubles. Und darf gedämmelt, wenn der Eulam hat gelacht, geklatscht und pflegt sich freien, hat gekränkt, das weiß nur Gott, besod, as keiner so nit zen. He laughed at all, and just in fact, when the audience laughed and clapped and had a fine time, he'd get ill, as only God knows, secretly, so no one should see. Peretz's epitaph is inscribed on the inside of the cupola of the elaborate oil, the mausoleum that was erected in the Warsaw Jewish Cemetery on the 10th anniversary of his death. The words of the epitaph were taken from Peretz's play, Die Goldene Kette, The Golden Chain, about 4 generations of Hasidic leadership. In Act 1, as his terrified Hasidim look on, the tzaddik, the holy Reb Shloime, sits at his tish, his ritual table, and refuses to perform Havdalah, the ceremony marking the return of normal time after the Sabbath. Reb Shloime, in other words, attempts to turn every day into the Sabbath, to force redemption, thereby risking the destruction of the world. In the final act, Shloime's descendant Yonason is left doubting his power to lead, to maintain the golden chain unbroken. But it's the words of Reb Shloime that were inscribed on Peretz's oil. Azoi gehen mir, singendig und tanzendig, mir große Jiden, Shabbos Yontevdike Jiden. Die Neshomes flackern, vor uns Wolken spalten sich, Himmeln prallen die Teuren auf, in onnen Hakoved schwimmen mir rein, zum Kisse Hakoved zu. So we go, singing and dancing, we big Jews, Shabbos holiday Jews, our souls blaze, clouds part before us, the heavens burst their gates, into the cloud of glory we swim, right up to the throne of glory. Und mir betten nicht, und mir betteln nicht, große, stolze Jiden seien mir. Wir sagen ihm, länger warten nicht gekonnt, Shir Hashirim singen mir, singendig, tanzendig gehen wir. And we don't ask, and we don't beg. Big, proud Jews are we. We tell him, couldn't wait any longer. We sing the Song of Songs. Singing, dancing, we go. So the ironies here are extraordinary. Sholem Aleichem, the self-described Klein Menschler, the little man, who liked to make people laugh, rests in an out-of-the-way corner of New York City. But his creation, Tevye, has permanently rooted himself in Jewish and world culture. Peretz, called the father of modern Yiddish culture, the supremely public man who situated himself at the prophetic center of that culture. Peretz, whose stature in the Yiddish-speaking world a century ago could not be exaggerated, lies under a crumbling monument in the vast, ruined Warsaw Jewish cemetery. Today, Peretz has been nearly completely forgotten. Sholem Aleichem was an extraordinary literary figure. Peretz was that and more. As millions of small-town Jews streamed into Polish cities at the end of the 19th century, Peretz oversaw the creation of a culture that spoke to their needs and in turn created those needs. From his apartment in Warsaw for a quarter of a century, Peretz produced a stream of poetry, stories, and plays, as well as critical and polemical essays published in his own journals and in the daily Yiddish press. This literature scrutinized every new cultural and political development on the Jewish and the Polish street. Peretz was the first to bring high literary talent into the service of the workers' movement. He was the first to turn to Jewish folklore as a source for literary creation. He was the first critic in the history of the emerging Yiddish theater. He was the first to bring a modernist aesthetic to the Yiddish stage, the first Jewish literary figure to involve himself in electoral politics. His apartment at the legendary address Tseglana 1 was a magnet for young Jewish writers and artists from throughout Eastern Europe. They came to him for approval of their first Yiddish writings, and they gathered at his home on Friday and Saturday nights to sing the folk songs they had collected in the small towns of Eastern Europe. Just as Hasidim gathered around their masters to chant their nigunim, their holy tunes. In a time of vast transition, Peretz dedicated his life to finding paths along which Jews emerge as Jews in the modern age. Today, I invite you to have a look with me at what Peretz was about in his own time, what can be retrieved of his legacy, and what of that legacy can still serve us today. Peretz can't be separated from his ideas. His literary work and his evolving political and cultural views were intimately interwoven. The great Yiddish literary critic Shmuel Niger declared that Peretz's literary work, his belletristic, and his political and cultural writings, his publicistic, were all of one piece. Each was shot through with the other. If I weren't afraid that I'd be misunderstood, he wrote, I would say that Peretz was always an essayist, a publicist in the higher sense of the word, even when he wrote poetry, folk-like tales, Hasidic stories, dramas. He was a thinker with a great belletristic talent, a publicist with an artistic imagination. Niger was afraid he'd be misunderstood because of our modern assumption that art is cheapened when it conveys a message. But Peretz himself was unafraid of saying just this about his work. I declare openly that I am a tendentious writer, he announced near the end of his life. I create the scenes only in order to illustrate the particular idea. And Peretz didn't hesitate to leap beyond writing into the political and cultural struggles of his time. Let's first have a look at Peretz's ideas. Peretz arrived at his major ideas gradually, from early allegiance to the Jewish Enlightenment movement, known as Haskalah, then to the Jewish socialist movement, especially the Bund, with a brief nod to Zionism. By the early years of the 20th century, he had arrived at a version of diaspora nationalism. This was the notion that Jews, above all in Eastern Europe, could be seen as a nationality, that their homeland was wherever they lived in large and compact communities. This idea had become increasingly popular towards the end of the 19th century. It developed in a world where numerous other groups were using the discourse of nationality to define themselves. Although, for the non-Jewish groups, the homeland tended to be geographically contiguous. Note that the word diaspora was foreign to traditional Jewish culture. Traditional Jews spoke of golus, of exile, a term rooted in religious narrative. More about golus shortly. The principles of Jewish diaspora nationalism were first formulated by the historian Shimon Dubnow in a series of articles in 1897. This happened to be the year of the first Zionist Congress in Basel and the founding of the Bund in Vilna. Dubnow's historical writings had focused on the importance of Jewish communal organizations, kehillas, chevras, in pre-modern Jewish life, on their ability to facilitate a high degree of communal autonomy for centuries within the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Jews were de facto a nationality, Dubnow now declared, and he developed the political consequences of this idea under the conditions of modernity. He argued that Jews needed to strengthen the internal structure of their communal institutions, which had been weakened after a century of rule by tsars and kaisers, even as they fought for representation within a future multinational state. For Peretz, it was the cultural imperatives of diaspora nationalism that were central. Above all, the commitment to Yiddish as the unifying feature of Jewish peoplehood. Nevertheless, in the course of the turbulent first decades of the 20th century, Peretz found himself drawn into a host of political struggles. The first of these came amidst the revolution of 1905, when Peretz, then in his early 50s, reached the peak of his influence. On January 22nd, 1905, in St. Petersburg, a demonstration of over 100,000 workers and their families was attacked by the police. This event, which became known as Bloody Sunday, triggered escalating protests throughout the empire that climaxed in a general strike in October. On the 30th of the month, Nicholas II issued the so-called October Manifesto that granted civil liberties and established a representative parliament, the Duma, thereby turning the empire into something approximating a constitutional monarchy. The manifesto was a great victory for liberal forces, but over the next several weeks, while revolutionaries organized a Soviet in St. Petersburg and an armed uprising in Moscow, the counter-revolutionary right, represented by the so-called Black Hundreds, fomented a wave of violence, which included the worst pogroms in Russian history. In the 3 months following the manifesto, over 3,000 Jews were murdered and tens of thousands injured in over 600 pogroms. With few exceptions, the police and army stood by or occasionally participated in the violence. Simultaneously, the government declared martial law. Over the following months and years, much of what had been promised in the manifesto was gradually undermined. Nevertheless, the revolution brought 2 lasting victories for the Jews. The government had long refused to permit a periodical press in Yiddish, and for several decades, it had banned the performance of Yiddish theater. Now, both prohibitions were lifted. The stream of Yiddish dailies, weeklies, and monthlies that followed, along with the explosion of Yiddish theater, first in Warsaw, then throughout the other towns and cities of the Russian Empire, led quickly to the flowering of a mass Jewish culture. Hundreds of thousands of Jews became theater goers and newspaper readers nearly overnight. Traditional and secular, rich and poor, newspaper readers and theater goers began to constitute a new kind of community. they found it increasingly natural to think of themselves using the discourse of modern nationality as das Yiddische Volk, the Jewish people or nation. Peretz, as I've mentioned, had worked with the early workers' movement and briefly with the Zionists. But in 1905, for the first time, the ideologies of nationalism and socialism, previously confined to drawing rooms and garrets with an occasional strike thrown in, swept up great numbers of ordinary people, both Jews and non-Jews. Today, a century later, knowing what would come of all this, for good and for evil, it's an effort to imagine days when, amidst the violence, anything seemed possible. Above all, the dreams of the new ideologues, when, to paraphrase Peretz, men felt they could be eagles. To put it another way, Reb Shloimo's Tish was now in the streets. Peretz leaped into the new era, using every means, every genre at his disposal to engage the new potentials. Peretz became literary editor of the new Warsaw Yiddish daily Der Weg, The Way, where he published, in the course of 9 months, some 50 texts. These writings span the entire range of his creativity. There are stories and one-act plays, poetry in verse and in prose, translations, literary and theater criticism, as well as publicistic of all kinds. His Geiles oder die Meise von Ziegenbock, Revelation, or the story of the billy goat, is a story that Peretz chose to publish in the first issue of Der Weg. It's a tale within a tale, told by the tzaddik Reb Nachmanke as a way of explaining his sadness. It concerns a billy goat with magical horns that each night secretly extended to heaven for news of the coming of Messiah. During hard times, the billy goat pulls gems out of heaven and hurls them into the marketplace to provide a livelihood for the townsfolk. But struck by the beauty of his horns, Jews begin to approach the billy goat for pieces from which to make snuff boxes. And gradually, his access to heaven is lost. Critics have read this story as a parable of the artist who sacrifices himself for the sake of his audience. There's certainly something to that reading, but there's also something else to which we will return. There's great foreboding throughout Peretz's writings at this time. Wandering through streets filled with demonstrators of every persuasion, resounding with frequent cries of Yiddish, unity, Peretz cannot muster the trust to believe in it all. A new day, you say? You believe, but I don't. Do you have the right to demand faith from me? His disquiet emerges full-blown in his poetry. Don't go with me, true and golden child. Sad is the lonely wanderer's road, is the refrain of a prose poem published just before Rosh Hashanah, a month before the October Manifesto. The wanderer's road leads him through horrors, through nights filled with lost souls seeking redemption and wrathful fallen angels, days when through the ash of those burnt up, through the dust of those never brought to their graves, an angry red sun glares. This is not the only place where Peretz's visions seem premonitions of the Holocaust. Yet he begs forgiveness of the child for what he has planted in its heart. In the following days, der Weg, on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, appears another poem about innocence and experience, this time a dialogue. A young woman solicits New Year's wishes from an older person. He at first demurs, explaining that he can scarcely imagine her future. When she insists, he responds with 3 wishes. The first is that she tell a smith to make crowbars and hammers instead of plowshares, because there are so many gates to smash. The second is that she no longer play with the sea, but wrestle with it as with a lion. The third is that she learn to dance among swords. Terrified, the young woman recoils, whereupon she is offered a lighter wish, that she love the morning, the radiance of the new day. Lay to rest the sweet poison of the dying evening and live for tomorrow when new life awakens. It will carry you away, child. The speaker concludes ambiguously. Is this also beyond your strength? 2 poems in 2 days. One fearing action and the other counseling action. Should it surprise us that shortly after, Peretz chose to publish a bit of Ecclesiastes in Yiddish translation? Hevel Havolim, vanity of vanities, sounds like this in Peretz's Yiddish. Narisch, narisch, als is narisch, men wird die Welt von Fleck nicht rühren, siehst das aus, was ist geschehen, wie das, was wird einmal passieren. Foolish, foolish, all is foolish. One will not move the world from stain. In vain, all that has happened as that which will still happen. Doubting his own strength and the very value of acting, Peretz nevertheless stepped fully into the political. Published in early January 1906, Oifa meeting, at a meeting, chronicles his venture into the dangerous evening streets and to a socialist gathering. The piece is signed Lucifer, one of Peretz's scoffing alter egos. He listens to a speaker invoke a litany of capitalist crimes and dubs it the Teucheche, the chapter of curses from the Bible. When the speaker concludes, "But now your day has arrived, you will be the judges, and you will judge measure for measure," Peretz responds, "It sounds like the trumpets over the walls of Jericho." And he asks, "Is the day really so near?" Moscow is quiet now, he reflects. The barricades are smashed. The guilty and innocent blood is covered with clean, innocent snow. In a word, though some may be unaware of it as yet, the revolution is waning. Does the audience believe the speaker? Peretz wonders. Walking home, he edges past the drunken Cossack by offering him a cigarette. 10 days later, abandoning the persona of Lucifer, Peretz addressed the workers' movement directly. Amidst the flux of counter-revolutionary violence, liberal hopes, and declining revolutionary prospects, Peretz embraces the workers' movement and simultaneously challenges it. The result is an extraordinary text entitled Hoffnung und Schreck, Hope and Fear. My heart is with you, he begins. My eye can't have its fill of your flaming banner. My ear doesn't tire of your mighty song. Man should eat his fill and have light, and he should be free and able to shape his own life and labor. When you march on old Sodom to tear it down, my soul goes with you, and the certainty that you must triumph fills and warms and intoxicates me like old wine. And yet, I fear you. I fear the oppressed who triumph. They can themselves become oppressors. Do they not say among you that humanity must march like an army and that you will play the tune along the way? But humanity is not an army. The strong go in front. The more passionate feel more deeply. The proud grow taller. Will you not spread your wings over mediocrity? Will you not armor indifference and protect the gray, identically shorn herd? As victors, you can become the bureaucracy. You will be preoccupied with regulating how strongly and how often the human pulse may beat, how far the human eye may see, how much the ear may take in, and what dreams the longing heart may dream. There will be no empty stomachs, but souls will hunger. And the eagle, the human spirit, will stand with clipped wings by the trough beside the cow and the ox. Justice will abandon you, and you will not notice it. And you will build prisons for those who point to the abyss into which you are sinking. I hope for your victory, but I fear and tremble for your victory. You are my hope. You are my fear. No other of Peretz's writings, to my knowledge, better deserves to be called prophetic. In the weeks after this reckoning with revolutionary socialism, Peretz published a series of 3 articles entitled Heimische Sachen. These texts are an attempt to formulate his own credo. The expression Heimische Sachen means both domestic things and things that are snug, cozy, and warm. The latter meaning here is entirely ironic. The first article begins with a vision of the end of days in which God judges the nations in the valley of Yehoshaphat. Among the nations stand the Jews, the only people without its own soul, and, adds God, not much of a body either. The Jews are divided into classes, though it's difficult to distinguish among them, and into parties, which are only identifiable by their banners. Standing on the side are a group of nervous Übermenschen, supermen, those who might be leaders, to each of which God asks, "What have you done for the soul of your people?" Each group confesses it had no time to spin the soul of our people, and each receives an appropriate punishment. Revolutionaries, for example, who are caught up in red flaming days, in seconds that flew asunder like lightning, are turned into fireflies that die each day with the setting sun. Pampered, well-educated young ladies who raced from one meeting to another are turned into a swarm of butterflies. The second article is a manifesto of diaspora nationalism, unique in Peretz's writings. Addressed to socialists, it weaves their own language with that of biblical prophecy. My people have been chosen for shame and derision, for wounds and woe, for blows and pain. The reddest of banners has been thrust into its hand with the cry, go, further and further, with all liberators, all fighters for the future, all the destroyers of Sodom. But you will not rest with them. The earth will burn under your feet. As long as blood is spilled, a desire suppressed, a wing clipped, it will be your wing, your desire, your blood. You will be the very last to be freed when man is freed from the earth, when out of human worms, human eagles rise. Don't pride yourself on your red banner. It's just the weak reflection of the bloody banner in the hand of the chosen people. I go with my people. The glint of its banner ignites my soul, and they call. Jews of all lands and peoples, unite. Long and perilous is the road. Hold together. The last article plunges back into the fallen world. It's subtitled Tandet, a word that denotes cheap, shoddy goods. And it speaks in the name of the Jewish masses. What is the world? An antechamber to the next one. Here one passes through, there one remains. To work here, to love here, to think of tomorrow and the day after here. Let millionaires build marble mausoleums to themselves. For us poor, a flimsy headboard is enough. And one lives just to get by, abi weiter, just to survive, über zu kommen. On the eve of a holiday, one sighs, the holiday's over already. Childhood is a prelude to marriage, and on the wedding day, the groom dons a shroud. Bride and groom fast and confess their sins. Two little flowers of exile, Gaulis Blimelech, sprout in the Jewish heart. Abi weiter, abi überkommen. Tandet. Everything is tandet. Life, trade, work. Without love, without certainty, without today, and later trembling shadows, trembling and clutching. Piety and good deeds, party activism, politics. Half a flicker, a quarter flicker, a wisp, a thread. The community of Israel sits and patches and darns. The old chosen ones, the few dead fossilized cedars of Lebanon, look down on our little grasses and sigh. These are our grandchildren. We are rather far from Reb Shloimeh. And we are also far from any of the many attempts during Peretz's lifetime and after to distill a simple message from his writings. What, at least at this moment, is Peretz's countervision, his response to the creeds that surround him? Both socialism and Zionism posited a movement that was fully redemptive. One could aspire to a post-revolutionary world, classless and just, or to a so-called normal life lived in one's ancestral land. One way or another, the future would not resemble the present. It would differ from it absolutely. What was the guarantee? Some combination of human will and historical necessity. But also something else, working underneath this human time and its possibilities, or perhaps beyond it. It was redemptive time that guaranteed the outcome of human struggles. It would take extraordinary sacrifices. The individual might not live to see it. It could take generations, but it would come to pass. Despite the impassioned denials of its champions, there was a touch of something beyond the human in such thinking. But Peretz rejected these notions. He rejected all guarantees. Summoned to believe, his belief falters even as he attempts it. His eyes cannot tire of the red banner, but the possibility of its triumph fills him with foreboding. It could turn into its opposite. And what sort of triumph would even the steadiest stream of Jewish settlers to the land of Israel entail? Could it possibly transform the situation of the Jewish masses in Eastern Europe, or elsewhere in the world for that matter? Peretz's vision, in contrast, is rooted in the everyday. The Bundes' favorite word was do, here, which produced the abstract noun doikate, here-ness, meaning one's energy was to be directed here to the daily struggles of working people and not there, not dart, towards some bourgeois Zionist dream. But Bundes, nevertheless, maintained the link to something that was as dart in its own way as the Zionist dream, namely the promise of a just world. In contrast, Peretz's commitment to doikate was absolute. What was do? It was everyday Jews, Yidden von der ganzen Jahr, in Golus, exile. One dreams of leaping out of Golus, and sometimes one leaps. But when one leaped, there was no guarantee either for the individual or the nation. One leaped in full awareness of the probable consequences, which are failure. And yet one leaped. One leaped because the alternative was tandet, spiritual death. Peretz was hardly the only diaspora nationalist, but more than Shimon Dubnov or even Shin Ansky, he seems to have grasped the tragic core of Golus. One can rise, one must rise. The expression oib nicht hecher, if not higher, the title of a celebrated story, just like Die Goldene Kate, escaped its context and became an exhortation to several generations of Yiddish-speaking Jews. Go higher than that, aspire, create, liberate. One rises, and perhaps one is also pushed a bit or tugged by redemption. Like every generation that preceded us, reflected the philosopher Walter Benjamin in the 1930s, as he inched from Marx toward the God of history, we have been endowed with a weak messianic power. Unquote. But one pays the price. Golus exacts a toll. And here we can return to Reb Nachmanke's billy goat with its magical horns. The billy goat's horns stretch to heaven each night for news of Messiah. They also physically nourish an entire community, but the townspeople grow too familiar with the billy goat, and they love putting snuff into their noses. Because they love the tickle and the sneeze, the magical horns are gradually chopped into snuff boxes, into the detritus, the garbage of Golus. Redemption may be very near, but human beings need their snuff boxes. This story is how the holy Reb Nachmanke chooses to explain the cosmic sadness that has overcome him. In the years following the revolution, its gains proved flimsy. The left was driven back underground into factionalism and exile, Parliamentary politics, one of the chief promises of the newly granted constitution, was undermined by successive Tsarist decrees. Voting to the newly created Duma was increasingly weighted toward property owners and professionals. Factory workers were largely disenfranchised. Nevertheless, the new cultural initiatives unleashed by the revolution now became permanent features of Warsaw life. Peretz seized on the new opportunities. He worked tirelessly for the Yiddish press as contributor and editor. He helped create Yiddish schools, and he founded a key institution, the Musical Literary Society Hazomir, which attracted a generation of young Jews eager to become activists for Yiddish. By 1908, at the Chernovitz Conference, when Yiddish was declared a national language of the Jewish people, Peretz was ready to identify the Jewish nation with the speakers of Yiddish. Quote, "One Jewish people, its language is Yiddish. And in this language, we wish to gather our treasure, create our culture, further awake our soul, and unite culturally throughout all lands and in all times." But Peretz's doubts, though often veiled, were never far. Just months earlier, he published in a Vilna paper something called a letter, in which he addresses an anonymous figure who sees only roses, who avoids the mean streets, the hospital, and the slaughterhouse, who, Peretz concludes, quote, "has seen the sea but not the storm, nor the broken ship on the sea. You are fortunate, but I don't envy you." Most importantly, it was precisely at this time that Peretz was working and reworking his magisterial modernist drama, By Nacht auf den Alten Mark. Night at the Old Marketplace was never performed in Peretz's lifetime. Written in rhymed verse with 4 acts, a prologue and the conclusion, a cast of several hundred, without a conventional plot, it was considered unstageable by the Yiddish theaters of the time. It's a challenging work even today. One way to approach the play is as a complex symphonic composition whose instruments are the many voices from the Jewish past and present over which soloists perform melodic lines. Among the soloists is the figure called the Wanderer, who first appears at the beginning of the play. In Hillel Halkin's marvelous translation, quote, "How much these ears have heard, and yet they would hear more. What's near still drives me on, what's far still draws me to it." The wanderer then falls asleep and dreams the play. The key soloist is the Badchen, a wedding jester, who, with God asleep, attempts to bring the end of redemption, and attempts to bring, the end of days and redemption. "You can punish me tomorrow, but since you're sleeping now, I'm Generalissimo." But this is a darker attempt to bring redemption than Reb Shloimo's. The jester exclaims, "His beloved name is a sacred swindle. To be alive, you must believe and kill. So let me wish you happiness and health. Come one and all to the old marketplace to do my will." Once again, Peretz's words are prophetic. The 20th century will see monstrous attempts to create new worlds with God not asleep, but absent. The jester's megalomania anticipates Hitler's and Stalin's, whose followers will also be instructed to believe and kill to do their master's will. The jester, however, still functions in the world of tradition, however attenuated. His megalomania will not necessitate the murder of millions. All he has to do is raise the dead. If he can keep them in the marketplace into the day after the rooster crows, he will have succeeded. First, the half-dead from the Vale of Spirits appear in the marketplace. Then the dead from their graves in the cemetery march into the marketplace and occupy the synagogue. Even the statues on the church walls come alive. Into the marketplace come representatives of Jewish pain, the martyrs bewailing the meaning of their lives, and more, the regrets and sighs of those who lived lives unlived, unfulfilled. From the present appear figures such as workers, Zionists, cultured Jews, and the anonymous someone, the ideal mass man. I don't know who I am, I only know what I want. All this amid snippets of folk tales, folk songs, folklore of all sorts, and from the synagogue, liturgy. Everything organized contrapuntally. Here's a simple example, an exchange between the jester and the figure called the recluse. 1, 2, God is through. 3, 4, he'll send no more. 5, 6, 7, miracles from heaven. 8, he shut his gate. Once they're assembled in the marketplace, the jester encourages the dead to dance. Feel what you've never let yourself feel. Live what you've never lived before. They dance, and the jester exults. Their dead faces almost look alive. There is desire, even lust, in those dead eyes. They hop about with so much zeal, their resurrection seems quite real. But suddenly, the morning star appears in the sky, and immediately after, the tin rooster on the roof of the synagogue crows. In the marketplace, the dead cringe as the jester asks for their help in wrestling the rooster. He invokes an ironic litany of messianic wannabes, past and present. Hey, what's happened to you all, you light spreaders and understanders, you messianic door bangers, you head against the wall bashers, you futuristic fly catchers. He then climbs the roof alone. If he bests the rooster, he will bring redemption, at least the traditional kind. But the jester emerges bloodied and beaten as the dead creep back to their graves. In his hand, he holds the wooden mallet used by the shamus, the beadle of the synagogue, each morning when he goes door to door, waking Jews for morning prayer. As the curtain falls, the jester assumes this job and begins his rounds. Jews, go to shul, in shularein. But his call is drowned out by a factory whistle. The jester's call was assumed by many of Peretz's contemporaries to be Peretz's as well. He was widely and bitterly assailed for counseling Jews to go back to the old-time religion. 60 years later, the great Yiddish scholar Chona Shmeruk entitled his encyclopedic study of the play, Peretz's Vision of Despair. But Peretz, I'd suggest, manages marvelously to slip past these certainties. In this case, there's the figure of the wanderer who has dreamt the entire play and awakens at its end. in an exchange with a recluse who asks, who but a fool could ever say that he has lived to see new things? The wanderer replies, and in the heart's interior, a secret hand is fashioning. New music's born, new hopes are spun. Oh, weave yourself, desire, weave. The wanderer will go on to dream and dream again. Night at the old marketplace may indeed be Peretz's ultimate judgment on the secular attempts of his and our time to redeem the world. But it's not a vision of absolute despair. With our feet firmly planted in the everyday, we may still dream and still leap. For we have, after all, been endowed with that weak messianic power. There is, however, absolutely no guarantee of success, and we remain finally in Gaulis, in exile, in the funkiness of the everyday. I began this talk by citing the inscription on Peretz's oil, the words of the tzaddik Reb Shloime from the Golden Agate. I will close with Peretz's poem, My Muse, My Muse, written somewhat earlier in his career. Nicht kein Nachtigall, mein Muse, hot kein Trellen, hot kein Süße, es ist a Jidene, an alte, an eingeschrumpene Amiese. Not a nightingale, my muse. She has no trills or sweetness. She's an old Jewess, shriveled and ugly. An Agune mit Jesäumim und Verspreite auf der Welt. Und ein Eviente Größe und sie schreit nur und sie schellt. An abandoned wife with orphans spread out across the world. A down and out pauper, and she only yells and curses. Peretz's legacy, I'd suggest, may be found in the creative tension between the holy Reb Shloime and this furious, abandoned wife. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Michael. Let me put us on there too. Wow, very interesting, inspiring stuff. Or maybe depressing.
What's that?
Or maybe depressing. It's hard to tell. Where does it leave us?
Well, exactly. It leaves us, it leaves us in a world of possibility, good and bad.
Mm-hmm. I have a few questions, and please, anybody, feel free to write some into the chat if you're there with us. But maybe I'll start us off with a couple things. First, you started early, and you kind of mentioned this difference between the graves of Peretz and Sholem Aleichem. And I'm curious, just it sounds like you were in Warsaw and had some experience by the grave of Peretz.
Sure.
Can you describe sort of what it's like there, what your first time there was like?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's right in the front row of the Jewish cemetery. But I can, I've been to many events in front of it also. The monument itself has these two lions, one on each side of his grave, and steps, going up to some kind of, looks like doors or something. It's a huge thing. I mean, it's a big thing, and I've been to. I mean, more recently, I've been to and the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and things like that. I've been to. It's a not quite like the statue, that's opposite the museum now, and not quite that, but still, I mean, people come to it and you got to know a little something to know what you're looking at. But yeah.
Huh. And I'm curious, like, do you have any idea, or what do you think, like, parents would think about the modern Yiddish scene and what's happening now with the movement and its connection to, social justice kind of things and whatnot, and like,
Yeah, well, first of all, first of all, Paris may have somewhat anticipated the Holocaust, but he would have, and he could have, he could have been, he'd been in his 90s during the Holocaust, if he lived that long. And personally, I think the Holocaust would have kicked him over into being a right winger, but because you can feel that, but there's no question that the revival of Yiddish, it's this thing, this horrendous destruction followed by a renewal, and there's no after many decades, and there's no question he would have approved, but I'm not sure he would have made it over the horror.
Right. And right, so he was born in what, 1852, I guess?
Yeah, that's right.
So he really lived through like a lot of modernization, huh?
Sure, that was the name of the game, and he was, in America, Jews think, oh, they all came from this, we all came from this primitive shtetl.
Right.
Paris was urban, it's like, there's a friend of mine that once said, yeah, I'm urban, man, and that's what parents would have, we don't do countryside, so and the thought that Jews, back then had that consciousness, is news to a lot of American Jews anyway.
Right. Yeah. Often I think we, like, I don't know, in our sort of general teaching and work, like, we try to both reframe the shtetl as not just some tiny village, but like an actual market town. And then also make the point that Jews were, by this point, they were also living in cities, and especially in places like Warsaw, right? It was what, like 20% Jewish almost, or 14%?
30% Jewish. And most of the very largest cities were all about 30% Jewish. And then, of course, the smaller towns, the shtetls were sometimes up to 80% Jewish.
Right.
And the shtetls went on. It wasn't they disappeared, but they started to be transformed as well by various, modernizations and stuff. But
right, the trains, the railroads, and everything transformed the market economy, I guess.
Yeah, and in that sense, Sholem Aleichem accompanied the changes too. Always so many stories on trains,
right,
that are moving from one place to another. That's new.
Yeah, I forget the name of it. I read a great sort of social study of like the train as a new social space where people would encounter each other in a different way than you would on the road or in. And I'm curious about this, like this kind of split between the city life and shtetl life, or whatever other kinds of life. Like, was there a strong connection of ideas, you think, an interchange of people between the cities and the shtetls and everything else's?
Well, of course. Certainly because the shtetls were emptying out.
Mm-hmm.
The shtetls, people left the shtetl beginning in the late 19th century. Masses of Jews left the shtetls. Some came to America, and some went to move to the biggest cities, and that's to and for not just America. They moved to England, to France, and so on.
South Africa.
South Africa, home of the Litvoks.
Yes. And do you think, like, did it go the other way too? Like, were Peretz's writings read fairly well in smaller towns, or?
Oh, sure. No, it was one culture. It was read. Not. Peretz would have been considered an apikoyeres, a heretic. So certainly the traditional Jews wouldn't have anything to do with him, as they don't today.
Right.
Jews moving, and then we have to understand that today there's a resurgence of religion of all kinds. Back then, of course, it was a period when religion was losing out and slowly weakening. Okay, and so secularism was the thing going on. I mean, it was the big deal, and it was pushing traditional religious stuff out of the way.
Uh-huh.
In the shtetls too,
Right. There's a couple big questions. Maybe I'll try one of them now and we'll see if it doesn't lead us to another hour-long discussion. But one thing that I kind of am meaning to address in the last few days and haven't really is the difference between Poland, Congress Poland, whatever, and the Pale of Settlements, after the partitions, especially like by this time, by the late 19th century.
Right.
Because this stuff is all happening in Warsaw and around Poland. And then in Petersburg, we have, this sort of all this ethnographers going and collecting things and people who were, could you talk about a little bit of like the difference between the experience in these two places? Or like, why do you think that stuff like Peretz was happening in Warsaw and why was, Ansky or Kieselhoff working in Petersburg?
Well, I mean, Ansky, there's a lot of interchange at this point. I mean, up until, of course, the Russian Revolution, right? Which then, so the Pale of Settlement, didn't. I mean, there weren't such huge differences, between Congress Poland and the Pale of Settlement. It was possible to do things legally in Congress Poland that it wasn't possible to do in the Pale. So yeah, but it wasn't that, by this time there was stuff happening, and Peretz's stuff went to the Pale of Settlement. And Ansky, of course, came to Warsaw and hung out with Peretz, and Ansky was inspired to do folklore through contact with Peretz, because Peretz was the very first, you see, he published a story called Jewish Life According to Folklore, and he was the first one to use folklore as in an aesthetic way, before that, some Jews had studied folklore, but it was always Russian folklore, German folklore. Jews didn't. No one thought Jews had folklore. What? Yiddish folklore? Because and then Peretz and then Ansky was some of the very first to say, no, bullshit. Look at this, and no one had looked. So anyway, there's that. But as I say, I'm not. There was a lot of interchange. There was a huge amounts of things going on both. And as I say, somewhat easier, but it wasn't. By then, it wasn't significant. It wasn't a major difference,
Uh-huh. Were there more restrictions on Jews living in cities in Russia than in Poland? Or
yes, generally speaking, there were, and there was less freedom of movement, for example. But again, I would tend to say, that increasingly there is one world, and we can speak of Eastern Europe with some, I feel that the differences are for kind of narrow history, whereas the stuff I like to look at, the cultural stuff is is everywhere in that world,
uh-huh. Would that go also for when you get into like the Habsburg Empire parts and get south, or then we really get into German?
Well, no, but that's different. But that's somewhat different again, and not completely different. But in the Habsburg Empire in Galicia, again, there was that was an area where Jews were free from 1863 on to vote, to attend universities. And so what you got in Galicia was a somewhat different constellation of things, because you had the people following, on one hand, Jews following Haskalah and going to the universities and learning German, and later learning German early, and then Polish, because Galicia became increasingly Polish. And the people, the Poles were left to run Galicia at a certain point. Okay, although nominally they were in the Habsburg Empire, but Jews. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, and on the other hand, first you had these highly educated Jews, and on the other hand, a lot of rebbes, a lot of chose to a lot of Hasidic masters, tzaddikim, chose to headquarter themselves in Galicia, and so you had the Hasidism in further west and north in Poland, in Warsaw. They were it was wealthier Jews, well-off Jews, educated Jews, somewhat educated Jews, but who supported, who follow Hasidim, and the myth, or was that in Galicia they're so backward, such backward Hasidic little enclaves, and that was somewhat true. I mean, because they were poor, but further west the Hasidim were very different. And again, people, there's long been this notion that in places like Warsaw, it was all the revival was of Warsaw, modernity in Warsaw was all pushed by the educated Jews, the maskilim and all that. But that happens not to be true, because at least as many traditional Jews also, pushed remained Hasidim, even as they created businesses and helped greatly develop Warsaw and Poland. So, yeah.
Right. So it's like, so the sort of the difference or the gap between the Hasidim and the secularists was maybe not as big, or wasn't as socioeconomic or something in
it was as big. I mean, but they both did stuff in Poland. If we're talking about Poland, the Hasidim, many Hasidim were very wealthy, very, very powerful, and they remained Hasidim. They went to see, well, the one Rebbe who was their Rebbe was the Gera Rebbe, the Rebbe of Ger, who's still around. Some descendant of the Ger Rebbe is still around, and they and for example, in the interwar period, the Ger Rebbe's son-in-law sat in the Polish parliament, but they were still Hasidim,
right?
Kind of like Hasidim. Some Hasidim, maybe. I don't want to do too many analogies, but maybe like Hasidim today, you can be wealthy, you can be, and still be a Hasid,
Right.
But back then it was like, all this is being driven by the assimilationists, and that's not true. The development was really by both sides at that point.
And both, I guess, parents, but especially Ansky, it seems like, use a lot of these images of Hasidim, or like rituals from the Hasidim, like, the Dybbuk is just full of all this, folklore that they collected. Do you think that they use it differently or for different reasons? Or like, and why? Like, is there some sense of like needing to take that power that they had and replace it with something kind of more secular, or lead into this, like, you talked about this kind of socialism and this new idealism kind of replacing the yearning of Hasidism. Yeah, I don't know.
It was there. I mean, you can't follow a Rebbe and be a modern person. That's what they were saying. But you could still, tap into all this, this amazing stuff. In a sense, you see what Ansky was doing. He made folklore holy. You see, he tapped into all that richness, but it was not, the richness of religious faith. It was the richness. See, the notion, and that it was common. That feeling and that notion was common throughout Europe, throughout Eastern Europe, certainly by this time. That there's something that folklore is rooted in the people's ways, and it's so important to nations to tap into their, it can go both ways. It can go to the left or to the right, into that holy, and to gather those holy sparks of folklore. So Ansky is really coming out of that, really. I think.
Yeah, it's interesting how it seems to almost tie together like the German romantic ideas of, the national character of the folk or whatever, and this like almost Hasidic thing of like gathering in the sparks and redeeming things by elevating them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But, and Ansky, yeah. All right, but it's different when there's a difference when it goes secular. That's all.
Right.
But what, I've never even, the meaning of the word secular is endlessly problematic. What do we mean by secular? This is a discussion that could go on for hours.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we'll come back to that one, or not. I don't know. Let's see how much time we have.
Who's there? About 2 people?
Yeah, we just got a few in here today, although I think we'll have more will be coming on the YouTube later and watching back. So we'll leave this for posterity. I'm curious, because we're so much involved here with Yiddish music in Weimar. I have a couple of questions on that line. Like, I would sort of assume that these people would be really into Yiddish song and collecting all these songs and maybe singing Yiddish songs, and like that the language, collection there would be a strong connection. But was that the case, or somehow did that not materialize?
You mean in Poland, as opposed
in Poland? Yeah, I guess in like especially like folk song or something. I would think like they would be gathering and singing.
They were gathering. They were being collected. They were being. I can't tell you the earliest collections. I'm not that much a maven of that, but it was about the turn of the century, and as I say, it was Paris Wrote a story that was published, I think, in 1900 or something, which said a story which was Jewish life according to Jewish song. The life of the young. I think it's the life of young people according to Yiddish song, and Ansky, and that was like a turning point for Ansky and for as you know, Ansky was started off as being a Russian revolutionary, and maintained he was a Russian revolutionary. That's not even relevant here. Go ahead. What more did you want to ask me?
No, I don't know. Yeah, I mean that's all just curious. But so it's like parents didn't ever, like, he wasn't collecting and publishing songs. Like, do we have any sense of if he
himself was not, but he used folklore to a huge extent. I mean, his stories. He published a collection of what was called Volksstimmliche, folk-like stim, right? Folk-like stories. He wrote his own stories, rooted in that folkloric base, so and as I say, and a lot of that was being brought to him by the young people, who thought he was some kind of, who was their leader, who was their prophet in a way,
There's maybe one more topic I'd be curious to get to that sort of connects to this, which is this idea of like Yiddish as a women's language or a women's kind of
Yeah.
area.
Yep.
I mean, it's something that I've been still trying to understand how much that's really true, or like, is it something kind of that we say, but like, especially like Yiddish songs, I think like there are plenty that men would sing, but there's a lot that's really like a women's genre, right?
Well, without being, accused of being too stereotypical and but um uh for me personally, if I compare, I mean, there's one way to do it, comparing Hebrew and Yiddish, Hebrew in that sense is harsh. Hebrew is a man's language. Yiddish is soft. It's a woman's language. I mean, and it began that way because, as we know, Yiddish was the first books written in Yiddish were, and for a long time thereafter, were for women, and those who couldn't read the holy text weren't permitted to, of course. But again, yeah, I mean, there was, I mean, the notion of the mother, the notion of the language of the people, the language, mom's language, all this, I think, is part of it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it's, I think most of us these days like to live in a bit of a non-binary kind of a world, but I think sometimes for understanding these moments, it can, this language can be helpful. But I'm curious, like, is there some sort of gender politics dynamic that's happening here by choosing to speak Yiddish to elevate that, as opposed to like Israel taking, and Zionists taking Hebrew and trying to create this, powerful rooted man?
There was de facto, but I'm not sure that Parrot. I mean, Parrot simply considered, Yiddish the language of the Jewish people. I mean, it was so obvious. You looked around, and there it was. So its femininity or masculinity was not that important. I mean, as they were, acknowledging and fighting for Yiddish as the language of the Jewish people, and then you can imagine, and then this tiny number of Jews turned to Hebrew, and not even the Hebrew that was spoken then, but this Hebrew, with its pronunciation, with its that was different from Ashkenazic Hebrew, and sounded different. And this little group of people chose to go to Israel and to publicize that. But the main, I mean, Peretz at the time, during the second decade of the 20th century, it seemed as though what Peretz was saying made total sense. It was the language; it was the daily language of the Jewish people, and Hebrew was spoken in shul.
Mm-hmm.
So it made sense back then, and of course after the Holocaust, everything steht auf den Kopf, stands on its head. So
right. So in a way, it's maybe more about socialist or class ideas of like Hebrew is something that you learn in school and you study, and it's what people actually are speaking on the street, what the workers are speaking, what the everyday people speak is Yiddish.
Yeah, I mean that everything. I mean, look, the all the socialist movements were workers' movements, and of course they used Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not in Israel, not in Palestine, but Palestine was tiny back then. It wasn't. I mean, they were seen as kind of crazies, who were doing this, and meanwhile, the masses of Jews, they hear what we got to do is, let's work with them. Let's let's see what they can accomplish.
Right. Well, I think we're technically 15 minutes over, and we do have a concert here coming up in not too long, so I think we should wrap up. I'm curious if I can just ask you one last short question.
Do any of the ladies have any?
Oh yeah, right. Do the ladies or the folks have some questions?
No.
They're pretty smart, these ones, but I think they're also extremely exhausted, like all of us. Yeah.
Right. That's right. It's going on to the end.
Yeah, well, we're in the middle really, but it's been a couple weeks.
No, but I mean, it's evening where you are, and it's
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's 6:30. There's the Cosmetics are playing in an hour, and we're all gonna get a
uh-huh.
little nosh. But I'm curious. This is probably, I don't know if this is an annoying question, but I'm sure some people watching this will not have really read any of Peretz's work. And is there like a translation or a certain story or thing that you recommend to people to get into his writing?
Yeah, I mean, you can read if not higher. I mean, that's a little story. I mean, there are collections of his stories. Um, it's tricky because, as I say, they don't follow the modern rules. They are tendentious. He's always trying to show something, you know. And
Hmm.
if not higher is a great play. Is a great, where he transforms Hasidim. The which shows how Hasidism uh, is all about helping the poor, and the spiritual part, the God part, no. Um, well, and then the one thing I would recommend, and I wish it could get staged sometime, is Night at the Old Marketplace, which Frank has done the music for.
Right, Frank
I
London.
think, I think you could do. I've long dreamed of Night at the Old Marketplace done. I mean, for all those out there, anybody who wants to do something and transform it, I mean, into something that's relevant um, to us today. You know, Night of the Old Marketplace lends itself to that. It's a modernist work, but it lends itself to huge questions about who Jews are, and where we're going, and all this. And there's excellent translation of Night at the Old Marketplace, and I would recommend that, actually, because
Hmm.
that speaks a little bit closer to our modern sensibilities.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I heard you speak about it before, and I was like, oh, this seems like something I would want to spend the next few years like trying to dig into. So once
I would
there's some
love,
time.
I would love to see a production. I would love to see a production. It would be wonderful. It could be wonderful.
Yeah.
Of course, it would have to be on a vast scale, like what's his name's, who's the guy who did these huge things in theater? Not to,
Somebody. But
anyway,
right, Frank did a version of it like 5 years ago or so, yeah, or 10 years ago now even.
yeah, I think something like that. But he didn't do the play. He did the music,
Right.
and he did music. He set stuff to music, which was great. But and I mean, it would take a cast of about 100 to do it properly.
Right.
It could be done, but again, for our time, not for Paris's time. You see, and you could transform it into something that speaks to Jews, to non-Jews, all in this kind of symbolic, crazy ass way, and it could work really well.
All
But
right.
who knows? I've been trying to convince people, but my access to theater people is not so great. So, but if someone could turn on someone who really has the wherewithal to create something like that, it could be wonderful.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. I think we're now in a race, all the theatrical Yiddishists around the world. Let's see who can get to it first.
Well,
Ruby is interested.
I haven't yet, so we'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah, we
I'm
could
not
be
holding
moving
my I'm
on.
not holding my breath, but
But luckily, we have thousands of years of practice of waiting, right? So,
no, our waiting is at an end.
yeah.
Impatience rules. Impatience rules. Now. So anyway,
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of now, I think now let's go get some dinner and go enjoy the cosmetics. But thank you so much, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear you speak and get to chat a little bit. And I look forward to the next time, wherever it is. And yeah, this is the end of our little lecture series this year at Yiddish Summer Weimar, which I think has been really special. And thanks everybody out there for tuning in. And please continue the conversation in the comment stream, and feel free to reach out to folks, and yeah, let's see where this all takes us in the next
Yeah,
year.
I'll be interested to see. I hadn't had the chance to listen to the other people who came before me, but I'm very eager to,
Yeah, it's all out on YouTube, so check it out.
I'm on vacation for a week now, beginning
Your vacation sounds like our vacation here. It's like, oh yeah, I have a day off. I only have 3 things to do, and they each can only take an hour.
How'd you guess?
Yeah, that's the life. Well, okay, Gita Vach or a good Shabbos, depending where you are, everybody, and which dialect am I in? I don't know. But we'll see you all next time somewhere, and check out.
Bis the next time.
Yeah, bis the next Mal, as we say here in Deutschland, or wherever you are. Sei gesund und stark, everybody.